Death, as defined on Wikipedia as the end of life, the irreversible cessation of all biological functions that sustain a living organism. But most people know it's so much more than that. Death is a force of nature that all of us will sooner or later come to face, and sadly in my own life I have become very familiar with the concept. Having death rear its ugly head in my life has had me thinking about the concept a lot, and it led me to analyze this ugly force of nature through the medium of anime. How does anime handle death, represent death, come to terms with the topic, and so much more? I'm Captain Lupe, and before we dive into the subject, before death, first, we must Death, when analyzed through the lens of time, is a relatively short concept, while life, on the other hand, or at least one can hope, is a much longer concept. For those of us lucky enough to be healthy and tragedy-free, life can be long and varied and comes with limitless opportunities. Anime is no stranger to this concept like most forms of media. You have characters like Jiraiya who were born into a world of constant war and conflict, but decided to rise above that by putting his faith in the next generation. David, who had all of society against him succeeding, but decided to claw and fight his way to the top. Himmel, who gave his entire life to the servitude of the people, even though they might one day forget him. All three of these characters lived vastly different lives and lived for different lengths of time, but they all share one thing in common: they lived. No one would have blamed Jiraiya if he had simply stayed the course and perpetuated war. No one would have batted an eye if David had remained at the bottom of society, surviving off the scraps that filtered down from the top. No one would have held it against Himmel if he simply didn't want to risk his own life for the betterment of the people. Not only would no one have blamed these characters for backing down, but backing down in and of itself is still living life, just represented in another way. The one common bond between these characters, and most of anyone for that matter, is the bonds and connections they made during the journey of life. The connections a person makes upon the journey of life, or lack thereof, is what truly defines living. If Jiraiya never takes on any of his students, the story of Naruto would never have happened the way it did. What is David if you take away Lucy, Rebecca, or Maine? Himmel could never have dreamed of taking down the Demon King without the bonds he had formed with his fellow party mates. Each of these characters can be defined by the ones around them, no different to our own lives outside of anime. The bonds one makes during life are arguably even more important in death, as they are the only truly meaningful thing left behind. The memories we share, the lessons we teach and are taught, the moments, small or large, are what truly make life worth living. But as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. First, we live lives filled with memories and bonds that define who we are, shaping our own world and the world of those around us. But then we die. For the person who dies, death is just an instant. A blink that brings one's life to a close. One moment the energy of life is coursing through their veins, and the next, everything is brought to a standstill. Death holds no grudges. It holds no ill will towards those it takes from this world. It simply takes because it must. The lead-up and circumstances for a person's death might be cruel and painful, and sadly deaths of that nature are far too common. But it can also simply be the final page on a journey a person spent their whole lives writing. Anime and all of media has quite literally endless representations of the literal act of death, but I believe it can be sorted into three main groups: foretold, unforeseen, and inescapable. Foretold death doesn't necessarily have to mean a character's death that was prophesized. Foretold is simply any death that comes with prior warning or notice. So it could be a prophesized death, death from a disease or sickness, or simply death as a result of an action that was warned to cause danger. David is a perfect example of this. David's life was all about trying to attain what he didn't have. To achieve this, he chose to add chrome to his body, even though from the very beginning he was warned that this would eventually lead to his death. He kept climbing, kept adding more chrome, and it eventually culminated with the end of his life. Even though chrome and cyberpsychosis wasn't what actually ended his life, it doesn't matter. He was warned what would come, and it came. Unforeseen death is quite literally the opposite. There is no warning, no premonition, it just happens. You could argue back and forth which group of death is worse, but I feel confident in saying that unforeseen death is the most cruel. Now that doesn't mean that it has to be instant or unforeseen by every viewer, and Jiraiya is a perfect example of this. Jiraiya set out to Amagakure for the purpose of recon, and his plan was to return home as soon as he got some answers. He even had time to say goodbye to some of those closest to him before leaving. He had a plan, and that plan went out the window when he found himself faced by the ultimate villain, or at least at the time. Jiraiya and everyone that knew of his mission expected him to return, expected him to continue being his pervy self. But plans changed, and death came unforeseen by anyone. Now, inescapable death might seem like a dooming word to choose, but it's not as scary as it sounds. Inescapable death is simply the truest reality of all life, and that is that death comes for all. The most prevalent version of this is simply a person dying as a result of old age. One might be led to believe that this is the quote-unquote best version of death, but that's only if a person has lived a fulfilled life that lets them leave this world in peace, and Himmel is the best representation of this. Himmel was the hero that killed the Demon King, saving all of humanity and ushered in an age of peace that had never been seen before. Along this journey, he met companions that would go on to be lifelong friends that upheld him as a hero. Now yes, he didn't get the girl, and one could argue that means he didn't live a fulfilled life. In fact, he spent his whole life waiting for her. But answer me this. In his final moments, surrounded by those he held closest to his heart, achieving a goal that they had set out years prior, do you think he left this world fulfilled? All of these characters experience death in wildly different ways, but the result is always the same. They were living, and then in an instant, they weren't. Regardless of whether it's painful or painless, quick or drawn out, happy or sad, death takes all and leaves nothing behind, except for those unlucky enough to have loved the deceased. Death is not painful for the person that actually dies, at least not in a metaphorical way. The absolute easiest part of any death is the death itself. It leaves us exactly as we were, but those around us are changed forever. Every person that goes through life meets people along the way, and these people fill up the empty spaces in our hearts. Time continues marching on, and these spaces become occupied with more and more people, or get filled with more and more cherished love and memories that friends and family bring us. But in our hearts where there was once love, memories, and someone's life, after death there is only a void filled by grief. When someone close to us dies and that heart-wrenching pain fills our chest, that pain is not death, but grief proving just how much we were connected to that person. Now, contrary to the popular saying, there are not 5 stages of grief. Grief will look different for every single person that experiences its sour taste. It will hit some people harder than others and will never look the exact same way for everyone. Grief also never truly leaves us. It stays with us for the remainder of our days, ever changing in how it affects us. When Jiraiya died, Tsunade and Naruto were the ones hit hardest by his death. Tsunade was forced to bottle up her feelings for the safety of the village, and this even angers Naruto as he takes this to mean that she never truly cared. But even that doesn't last long, as she becomes furious with herself for letting him go. Naruto, being free of that responsibility, lets his emotions run free. First, Naruto is angry that Tsunade even let Jiraiya go, blaming her for his death. He then enters a deep depression as the realization that he will never get to meet his sensei again sets in. Both, on their own terms and in their own way, come to accept that Jiraiya has passed. Due to David being the last member of their gang to die, Lucy is essentially left to process her grief in solitude, and her way of doing that was to achieve her goal of going to the moon. Even though she achieves her goal, she quickly comes to realize that during her time with David, the goal had shifted from going to the moon to going to the moon with the love of her life. The same love that was ripped away from her. Frieren has one of the most unique as well as best representations of grief in all of anime. Her immediate reaction is acceptance. Acceptance that humans live unreasonably short lives in comparison to hers. It isn't until the moment of Himmel's burial that she truly comes to realize the grief within her own heart. She then sets out to understand this grief, exploring the world around her, the world which Himmel gave his entire being to protect and serve. She wants to understand what her connection to Himmel really meant to her. Quite literally, the whole point of the frieren anime is to show how we process grief, and how that grief is with us for the remainder of our days, constantly changing us as people. Grief reared its ugly head in different ways for each of these characters, but each and every one of them had immense love for a person who left this world, a love which was taken over by grief. I hate the saying, death is what gives life meaning, because what actually gives life meaning is what happens as time continues to pass after death. I meant it when I said death leaves a void filled by grief, and that grief never really leaves us for the remainder of our days, but mixed in with that flurry of pain is what truly gave life meaning in the first place. The whole reason we experience grief is because of the bonds we shared with the deceased, bonds that were forged and tempered by memories we made, lessons we learned, and all of the small moments in between. Beyond death and through all the grief, this is what the dead leave behind, how they impact the ones they loved. Jiraiya is forever gone, but Naruto never would have become the hero we all know and love if it wasn't for the lessons and memories Jiraiya imparted on him. David is forever gone, but Lucy never would have learned to move on from her tortured past if it wasn't for the bond she formed with David. Himmel is forever gone, but without his influence on Frieren's life, no matter how short, Frieren never would have learned the importance of the bonds we form and the ones we love. We all loved Naruto, Lucy, and Frieren, but still the saddest truth yet is these characters never would have become the characters we love dearly if it wasn't for the passing of Jiraiya, David, and Himmel. As I said earlier, death leaves the deceased exactly as they were, forever unchanging. But for the living, death leaves them permanently changed. Now I'm gonna leave this section short and sweet because the main point of this video was to dissect death itself, as well as dive into what grief truly is. But even in saying that, it's important to remember that death is painful. It will always be painful. But even if you struggle to see it yourself, death does not only consist of pain. Honestly, I don't really have many closing thoughts to give you all. Death is a tricky subject to cover, especially if covered in a more nuanced way, but anime and all of media for that matter cover this topic quite often because it's a topic everyone will experience. And for those of you out there that claim media is purely for entertainment and has no deeper meaning behind it, you're just simply wrong. All media, anime included, has lessons to take away, topics to dissect, and themes to explore. You would have to just actually be ignorant to claim the death that is covered in shows like Naruto, Cyberpunk, and Frieren has no deeper meaning or themes behind it. I set out to make this video for the express purpose of analyzing the death that is displayed in anime as a whole, because unfortunately in my own life, death has begun to rear its ugly head far more often than I would ever care for. I began to think about this subject a lot recently, and used anime as a medium to explore these topics. Now, did I have some inexplicable epiphany during this dive into death within anime? No. But I would be lying if I didn't admit that I did learn something, and took away lessons that will stick with me for years to come. But as I end this, death never really gets easier. And that wasn't the point of making this video. But if you are experiencing death in your own life, just remember that life does go on. You will make new memories, new friends, and new loves. Just always keep on going. It's what they'd want.